Everyone, to all our viewers from all corners of the world. A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, depending on your time zone. Welcome to the 12th virtual panel discussion hosted by America's Sri Lankan Photographic Arts Society in Los Angeles, California, USA, a member of Photographic Society of America, PSA, and the International Federation of Photography of Art in France, FIAP. The objective of this series is to promote and showcase the incredibly rich biodiversity of the Pearl of the Indian Ocean, Sri Lanka, to the world. I'm your host, Medini Ratnayakar. We are streaming live from Los Angeles, California, USA, and connecting with our panelists in Sri Lanka and United States. This week's topic is Wonders of World of Birds. Today, we have three veteran personalities to share valuable information about wonders of the world of birds from wildlife conservation and photographic perspectives. Let us meet our first panelist today. Vidya Jyoti Emeritus, Professor Sarath Vimalabandara Kotagama. Professor Kotagama graduated in marine ecology from University of Colombo and holds a PhD in ornithology from the University of Aberdeen, Scotland. He was an academic since 1974 at the University of Colombo and the Open University of Sri Lanka. Professor Kotagama has carried out research on rainforest bird flocks for over 30 years at the Singharaja World Heritage Rainforest. He is the author of 25 books and over 100 other publications on environment, mammals, amphibians, and birds in English and Sinhala. Professor Kotagama was the director of Wildlife Conservation Department in Sri Lanka from 1989 to 1992. He is the founder member of 4 environment-related NGOs and assisted in the establishment of the Coast Conservation Department and the Central Environmental Authority in Sri Lanka. He has been the chairman of the Environment Council and member of the Northwestern Environmental Authority Board and the Biodiversity Experts Committee. He is the author of the National Wildlife Policy of Sri Lanka as well. Professor Kotagama is a recipient of several national awards, including the highest award, Vidya Jyoti, for science contribution in 2017, President's Lifetime Harita Abhiman Award for Environment in 2016, and international awards, Nature Interpreter, Nagoya Prefecture, Japan, Distinguished Achievement Award in USA. Well, Professor Kotagama, we warmly welcome you to our panel discussion today, and I would like to open the forum to you. It's a great privilege to have you here with us, and I'm going to allow you to start your presentation.
Thank you, everyone, to all of you all, everybody. First, thank you very much for inviting me for this panel discussion, or at least introduction of the birds, which has been my pet from my school days. Being the first ornithologist in Sri Lanka, it is a privilege to be with you all to let you know where we have come so far. I'm also happy that Dr. Sampath is going to assist me in doing the nicer part of the talk. I will give you only the background talk of what we are and where we are, and I hope that it will help you to align yourself with Sri Lanka and to come and see our birds, which are very much the vogue and interest, especially the flocks. I would not be touching on any of those things as such, but I will try my best within the time frame. So let me go straight into the slide pack that I have put together, a very short slide pack, which is trying to assist you with the details of what I want to tell. Okay, right. So once again, Ayubowan, it says, may all living beings live long, and let that be the case in the midst of COVID. I think we need to do our best to stay long. Right, so birds of Sri Lanka, we have at the present around 510 birds recorded. which includes a variety of different kinds in terms of the listing. We have 3 lists as such: specimens that are confirmed with type specimens, species with observations more than 3, others less than 3. Sri Lanka, being at the end of the Indian subcontinent, receives a lot of birds from all over, especially when turmoil happens in the ocean. There are birds that are getting driven off and coming on to land. And we also get many of those birds that come down from the northern hemisphere when the winter brings the temperatures down there. So it's a very interesting point, and that makes the Sri Lankan bird numbers, even though it may not sound very high, pretty high in terms of a small island. So we have many resident birds, among which the most important group is what Sampath will speak about later on, about our endemics compared to the other countries. Of course, yes, we don't have as many endemics as maybe some islands in Southeast Asia or in South America, but we have quite a large number, 34, and that's quite a lot. And as I said, we have a lot of migrants and we have a lot of vagrants, and having a large sea around us, we have a lot of ocean birds also. So these 34 endemics are unique to this country, and they breed only in Sri Lanka. This is our pet bird to me, and not the most beautiful, but the one that is very surruptive and very secretive, and so that is our logo of the Field Ornithology Group of Sri Lanka. We are an endemic bird area, so that itself qualifies for anybody to come and see the birds in Sri Lanka, because that says that within a small area we have quite a large number of birds, and that makes it very interesting in terms of BirdLife International. Over the years, we have been able to recognize and identify 2 important things. One is where the birds are found and where the birds need to be looked after and protected, which we call the important bird areas, which would now gradually convert themselves into, with time, to key biodiversity areas in the future. In addition to that, we have identified almost all the best locations for birding in the country, which is distributed around in this map. If you look, you can see it's very little, but it's all public, so it is available. Among the birds are some very unique birds, which we call relict birds, which is trying to tell us the story of what happened to the planet in terms of moving continents and how these birds are distributed. One of my students who did a study on this very beautiful blue magpie found that the related species are far away in Taiwan rather than in India, North India. So this is very unique and very difficult to understand, but this is the reality. So this is what Sampath will also talk a little bit more on details with a lot of other birds that he has started with the evolutionary concept. So you have this very unique situation where there are blanks in the middle. So we have our endemic jungle fowl, but the one that is closely related to the jungle fowl is the red jungle fowl, who is believed to be the one that was domesticated 5,000 years ago and became the common cockerel that we have around our houses. But there is one in the middle between, which is called the gray jungle fowl, with a long relationship, distance relationship. So it's very strange how these things have happened, despite the fact that birds can move around quite easily compared to other animals. We also have a large number of so-called restricted species, which are found in very strange distribution patterns and in very strange numbers also. There are very many of them are quite small in numbers, but found in very unique places. These 2 birds, for example, the one referred to here as painted partridge is found in the southeast corner that we call the Newe-er province in the Nilgala area, and nowhere else in Sri Lanka, and that's very unusual, and why it should be. The next one, the blue-eared kingfisher, is found in very patchy locations here and there, mostly first identified in the good old days to be at Nilgala, which is again in the same area southeast of Sri Lanka. But then subsequently it has been sighted in a couple of other places, but it still remains to be a elusive bird and very difficult to spot, and we hope it is still around. So over the years we have been able to identify different areas where the birds are distributed. This was first done, of course, way back in 1881 by a very famous ornithologist, entomologist, Captain Legge, Vincent Legge, which was improved upon by me by looking at the associations of birds in the different areas. And you have the northern birds, which are very akin to the Indian continent. And then you have the dry zone birds, which are somewhat common to most part of Asia. But then we come to the wet zone area that you will see LC wet, MC wet. These are mid-country, which are containing most of the endemic birds. Right, so just a quick glance to those different zonal birds. Here is the northern group, which is not very colorful as you can see, but they are somewhat unique because these are some connected to the northern South Indian continent. And then in the hill country, you can see many of them are the endemic birds. Some are close to being endemic, some are found only in the open patna areas of the dry patnas of the or the wet patnas of the hill country areas like the Ushchat. And then we have a critically endangered bird which comes to the hill country, which is the Kashmir red-breasted flycatcher. Then we have a universal bird, which is the blackbird. But if you look at the blackbird in Sri Lanka, it is not like the blackbird in other parts of Europe or in the United States or going across even to some parts of Asia. So you have some very, very special birds like these. These are in the mid-country of the wet zone. And then, of course, we come to the low country wet zone, which is again another set of birds. So despite the fact that Sri Lanka is a small island, there are very unique features that differentiate these aggregates or collections of birds to different parts of the country. In fact, if you go across from east to west, you will go like a step. We call it penny plains. So you have the lower areas, and then you have the mid areas, and then you have the third penny plain, and then above that you will have the highest point with Rutalagala. So these penny plains basically seems to isolate the birds also, despite, as I said earlier, being able to fly around. But this is very much evident in the other groups of animals we have in the country, like the amphibians and the reptiles. So this is the very unique group in newe-er province, which is somewhat in the first penny plain and second penny plain area. The yellow-footed or yellow-legged green pigeon found in Nilgala, the scaly in that area right round in the Madolsima region, or the Badulla Madolsima, that is all in the southeast area. And then this circia, which is a ground bird which runs around in the ground crawling among the trees, has in the present distributed or has extended its range, but in the past it was very much sighted only. So the name itself says that southern circia in the dry areas of the southeast. Right, so from there I would like to also say that there is a lot of connections of birds and the people. You know, we have been seeing this very extensively in this country. In art, in poetry, you can see that people have used birds as messengers, and when the bird flies, the poetry tries to describe what the bird sees on the ground, and that makes it very interesting to see how the bird's eye view of the ground has been narrated through poetry, which is called sandeshas, and these are there are about 32 of them actually. This is just to show you two of them, which is one is the swan sandeshas and the grackle, Salalihini and Hans sandeshas. And then we have other connections. It's very much in the music as part of most part of the world, and then it is also in the art, in the fashion design, and of course very much in the patterns of different motifs and things like that, used extensively in this country for various purposes. And then of course there's something that I think is very interesting in the way of looking at it for bird watching or bird viewing, because these two, what you see here, are parts of two different dances, which is the peacock and the eagle, which I put eagle because it's called gurulu, meaning the bird of prey, and the peacock dance, which is mythological dance. You see, you can just see how the hand is being held, you know, just holding like that itself shows the head and the beak of the peacock. But what is interesting is when you watch this dance, you will actually really see the bird in action. So to do that, the people who who choreographed this dance would have definitely been watching the bird very closely to see what it was doing and how it was behaving and things like that. So good observation has always been part of the natural history of the people, and so they have converted this into a number of expressions through dances and things like that. And then we have, of course, a lot of myth connected with the birds also. In our country, Sri Lanka, our New Year actually traditionally dawns in around April, and that bird, the koel, gives the message that the new year is coming. So it is referred to as the Aurudu Kurulla, meaning New Year bird. And of course, that is because it is getting ready to breed. But our interpretation is that this is the bird that announces that the new year is coming around the corner. And so we have a whole heap of traditional activities that go with it, linked with it. And I suppose we are the only country in the world where everybody puts out the kitchen fire and then lights it at the same time, at a very auspicious time across the whole country, because it's a Sinhala and Tamil New Year. So 72 to 80% of the people in the country will be doing that, which is a very unique feature. And of course, all the activities connected with this special event is very much nature-based and planetary in terms of the times that have been decided. So it's a very close connection. And of course, we also have these ideas that if a bird calls like the woodpecker, it's a bad omen, and so you should not travel out because things will get not work for you and so on. But quite a lot of myths also around the bird. In the recent years, of course, meaning we were interested in bird watching and trying to see how we evolved the bird watching scenery. We looked into the history and we found that our people have been looking at birds or have been placating for them or helping them to survive in the wilds. So you have as way back as 368, 410 AD, King Upatissa having had the royal garden where he allowed the birds to come, or the Ruwan Malala, which recognizes about 24 birds identified. And all of these documentations have numbers of birds that have been identified. The Vesatruda Sanaya is the 12th century, which has about 60 birds identified. In the recent years, of course, people traveled across the country and they have described the birds of Sri Lanka and the natural history of Sri Lanka, in which we have people like Robert Knox, George Edwards. One real person who did a lot of information for the birds is actually the governor, Jan Gideon Lawton. He enabled the initial start of the scientific birding that we can call as of today. And there we had, he got a Sri Lankan, Peter Cornelius de Beaver. His name is not Sri Lankan, but he is a Sri Lankan who was made to paint the birds, and that became somewhat the basis for the taxonomy of the birds in this country. And then subsequently, there have been a lot of contributions by different people at different times, and all of them kept on adding more and more birds into the list. Layard, these are standard names. And then we have this very unique person who, for being here only 8 years, put a huge manuscript together and described unbelievably how and where the birds were found, which is still to tell that this is the best probably publication that we have on birds for Sri Lanka, including the descriptions of the plumage of the birds, very, very detailed. And we don't have anything after that. So this is around 1881 by Captain Vincent Legg, who did this, and you can see about 371 birds were done. Other contributors were Murray, who did something in 1890. Then we had a survey done, which enabled the bird numbers to be increased by weight. And then, of course, we have G.M. Henry, who was an entomologist, but did a lot of good birding, who put across the birds of Ceylon, which is the best publication in English, very good narration, which anybody probably could understand well. And then we have some technical assistance provided by people like Stuart Baker, Dylan Ripley from the USA, Smithsonian, and then you have Salim Ali from the Bombay Natural History contributing. And we had the avifaunal survey in the 1940s, which enabled us to increase the numbers to 384 and the endemic numbers to 22. Phillips, who was around here, wrote a lot about the birds of this country. All of these things contributed to enhance the interest among the Sri Lankans on birds. And that was a big thing. And then finally, I would like to say that this was the breakthrough for a Sri Lankan perspective when myself and Prithviraj Fernando put out the first local guide for people. And from here, since 1976, when the Field Ornithology Group was established, things burst out. And today we have a lot of people who are looking at birds and enjoying. So this is the Sinhala publication. This has been translated into Tamil. Over the years, there have been 2 bird organizations that has contributed to this new interest that is there in this country on birds, with the researchers in the university systems and a lot of people birding. You can see the Ceylon Bird Club, which has started in 1944 and continues to be there, limited number of people. And of course, I initiated the Field Ornithology Group for Sri Lanka in 1976 in the University of Colombo, and that has an open membership with students, and anybody can become a member. And we have a very unique way of telling our numbers. We say we have an annual membership of, that is the people who pay for the year, and then we have accumulated membership, which have become members over the past, and some may continue to pay, some may not continue to pay, because our philosophy is once you are a birder, you are a good conservationist for life. And of course, we have corporate members and so on. So we have been part of the BirdLife International since 1984 under the ICBP, and then BirdLife International from 1994. So we continue to contribute a lot. Birding in Sri Lanka is very, very interesting because there's huge diversity. A lot of the details with the beautiful pictures will be done by Dr. Sampath Senviratna, who's going to come after me. So thank you very much for enabling me to give you a very quick run through the background of the birds of Sri Lanka, rather than go into individual birds and say my personal bird is the Sri Lanka blue magpie, which you will see from Dr. Sampath's slide. It's a very beautiful bird, but I didn't work on that bird. I worked on the rose-ring parakeet, which is a bit of a pest around the world also, but I had to try to see why it became a pest and try to control it in the paddy cultivation and so on and so forth. And then, of course, I shifted to, as Medina just said, to looking at flocking. For 30 years, I worked with the bird flocks at Singaraja, which again is something you have to see and hear and experience if you want to know what is the best bird flock in the world. So please visit Sri Lanka for that purpose. And photography, fantastic birding around and plenty of things to photograph, all for the photographers. So let's hope COVID will open up a new chapter for us to all get back and see these wonders before, of course, sadly to say that most of them are under threat and we will not annihilate and get rid of them at all. So be blessed that it will stay. Ayubowan Teruwan Sarnai.
Thank you very much, Professor Kotagama. We'll allow Professor Kotagama to close his slideshow. There you go. So now I'm moving to our second panelist, Dr. Sampath Senviratne. Dr. Senviratne has a PhD in evolutionary ecology from the Memorial University in Canada. He's a senior lecturer in Zoology Department of Zoology and Environmental Sciences at the University of Colombo. He's also the president of the Field Ornithology Group of Sri Lanka and the Sri Lankan Ecological Association. Dr. Senviratne is a consultant biologist on evolution, conservation, genetics, and ornithology. Dr. Senviratne was a postdoctoral fellow at the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, Bird Studies Canada, Pacific Wildlife Research Centre in Canada, BT Biodiversity Museum, Vancouver, Canada, and a teaching fellow in the Department of Zoology, University of British Columbia, Canada. He has been carrying out research at the Avian Evolution Node Laboratory, Sri Lanka, on Sri Lankan endemic birds using phylogenetic sister pairs, and has been credited with the discovery of 4 new species to science, including a bird, a tree snake, and 2 parasites. So Dr. Sampath Senratna, very warm welcome to you, and it's a great honor to have you with us today. And I'm opening this forum to you for your presentation, and we are very much looking forward to it.
Okay, thank you very much, Medini, and thank you very much, everybody, for the opportunity and taking time to listen to us. I will quickly share my screen, and yeah, I think I have a bit of slides. I'll try to skim through the slides as I talk, and what I try to do this morning to you all is to kind of to understand or to navigate through the wonders of the birds through kind of two small virtual field trips. One into the old forest of Sri Lanka, and one onto the kind of a global trotting in a kind of a bird's eye kind of viewpoint. So I'll move through with my slides as I talk, and I will use Sri Lankan birds as a proxy to understand and to appreciate the life on this planet, the only planet that we know of the life exists, and also the only planet that we have as our home. So in that way, behind our back, there's always that responsibility to appreciate, to study, and to save the only place that we can call home. And in this context, Sri Lanka is a smaller island, and our home, where most of these viewers, I think, had some relationship, either as a visitor or was born there or living here. And so through that, as a small kind of a mirror, we try to understand the life on the planet. Since my kind of North American background was mentioned, the bird behind me, the crested auklet, and the auklets were the species that I studied for my PhD. I spent 5 summers in Alaska and the Aleutian Islands to study the evolution of these birds. And now I'm more interested and in love with these ones in the tropical forest. And so it's a beautiful, I think I'm quite happy the way my life going so far. So let's look into the endemics and migrants as a kind of a small viewing glass to understand the wonders. Sri Lanka carries a very high biodiversity, as Professor Kotagama very nicely pointed out. And in our avifauna, the bird fauna is about only just 5% of the global diversity of birds. It includes about 500 species, and of that, though, 34 species are endemic to the island, and about 1/3 of all breeding residents of the island, when you consider the subspecies or races, are endemic. So there's a very high percentage of endemic types, either the plumage, the colors, the calls are somewhat unique to the island. And when you look into the region, as you can see, this column is, give me a second, I'll get the laser pointer. So this section shows the size of the landmass in the South Asian region, and this section shows the number of birds, species, the size, and this section shows the endemicity, which is the percentage of endemics found in as a fraction of the total number of species. So you can see that in Sri Lanka has much higher endemicity for the region. And when you consider North America, it has about 750 species, very few endemics. So this number would be very tiny, somewhere here for North America. And we know that islands carry endemics, but let's see why is calls and so on. So there's two suggestions. One is we have a very heterogeneous topography. We have about 2,500 meter tall mountains in the middle. We have coastlines. We have dry, very dry desert-like areas, especially in the north and the southern east, and then the very wet middle, and like Amazon-like wet and sometimes flooded rainforest in the southwest. And also we were once upon a time almost a sub-Antarctic island. So this sub-Antarctic island about 150 million years ago had moved along the Indian Ocean with India and came to a tropical island in about 40 million years ago. So over the past 100 million years, this sub-Antarctic or almost Antarctic southern 49th latitude island that was in the southern 49th latitude became an island on the slightly about 5 to 10 degrees north in the equator. So this movement had caused Sri Lanka a kind of an interesting thing where it has Gondwanan, that's a great southern continent's soil, and Laurasian, the great northern continent's diversity, animal diversity and plant diversity mixed in our island because of this kind of quite unique geologic and biogeographic events that had been taken place over the past 40 million years. And Himalayas, as most of you might know, is about 40 million years old because Himalayas was formed as a result of this impact. So let's take a quick walk into this old Gondwanan rainforest that we have in Sri Lanka. And with that, we will see some cool birds. And with that, as Professor Kotagama kind of gave a really nice introduction to the things that I wanted to talk to you all, let's see where they come from and how pretty they are, or how different they are, and to understand a little bit about birds. So the forest, the rainforest of Sri Lanka, this is southwestern lowland rainforest. This is what it looked like. Tall, not as tall as Bornean rainforest, but about 75 feet tall forest, very wet, full of leeches on the floor. And this is our national bird, Sri Lanka jungle fowl. The female is drab in color, male is very colorful with a flame like carbuncle. Found across the island, but it's a very pretty, very common bird. Sri Lanka is quite friendly and tolerant about its wildlife. So still jungle fowl is a common bird that can be seen in home gardens and in protected areas alike. One of our prettiest birds in a birder's viewpoint, this is the male spur fowl, again an endemic. I'm showing only the endemics in this journey. These are common birds that you would see in this walk into the this sort of a rainforest. And I'm specifically referring here to the Singharaja rainforest, our largest intact rainforest in this country. Sadly, the government decided to redo a road that basically threatening this critical rainforest of the world. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So it is timely to discuss these things when the government funded projects threatening the very existence of one of Sri Lanka's most critical habitats. So it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So I hope that the global community would understand the value and help the Sri Lankan biodiversity sector to safeguard these forests. So in the rainforest, you will see, especially in the canopy, in the lowland areas of this rainforest, the Ceylon green pigeon or Sri Lanka green pigeon, which is a very common bird across the island, as you can see. Oh, these maps, by the way, are the modeled maps. These are not the actual distribution. This is the niche models where green means the bird has much higher density, and brown means slightly lesser density, and white means, doesn't mean they are absent, but it's quite a bit low, the numbers. And in the higher elevations of this rainforest, you will see this Sri Lanka or Ceylon wood pigeon. a very pretty bird, shy bird in the canopy. Most of these birds have their close relatives in the southern India, in the southern western part of India, which we call West Ghats, Western Ghats. Is a continuum of the wet forest of Sri Lanka, but the Western Ghat is not as wet as Sri Lankan southern western rainforest. So these guys, as a result of the island nature, as a result of very wet nature, and as a result of the mountainous conditions, had been isolated from the Indian forms and became endemic. A teeny tiny kind of budgie bird type hanging parrot. It's another endemic bird. Again, its relatives are found in the Western Ghats, especially in the Nilgiris. And in Sri Lanka, it is confined to the wet forest. Similarly, the Layard's parakeet or the grey parrot is also found in the western part of the island, and both of them have their relatives in India. The commoner ones, the barbets, the cavity nesters, these two are very common species. There are two other barbets in the country, but in a rainforest, in our walk into the forest, both these are endemic. This one is more towards the higher elevation areas, very common in those parts. And the Ceylon small barbet is common throughout the island, more towards the wet zone. Again, their relatives are in India. And as Prof mentioned, one of our most charismatic species, very secretive in nature and very unique in distribution. Like a donut, it found around the foothills, not found on the mountains or the lowlands, but in all climatic conditions, but around the mountains. It found very pretty bird with a bold red face, and it's called red-faced malkoha, one of our best endemics. And the malkohas are actually, mal is the flower of the Sinhala vernacular. Koha is the cuckoo, so it is a very pretty cuckoo, but it builds its own nest. Similarly, another such cuckoo is the green-billed cuckoo, another close relative of the red-faced malkoha. Again, wet zone endemic, a common bird in the forest, but you don't see it outside at all. Some of the night endemics in the rainforest. I'm still in the Singharaja rainforest in this part of this walk. Jungle owlet is more diurnal and it's very vocal, easy to see, easy to hear more. And if you follow the call, you will eventually locate this endemic. It's confined to the wet zone again. And the Serendip scope owl, about 10 years ago, a Sri Lankan ornithologist discovered this bird, again found in the forest. And this is the species that Prof mentioned, the Ceylon blue magpie or Sri Lanka magpie, one of the prettiest birds in the country, and according to some, it's the prettiest, and it has a very unique, very special dance, flight that they do. Very tame bird. It would attract to the lodges and the like touristy places in and around the rainforest for fruits and insects. It's basically a colored crow. It's a corvid, closely related to a crow. Some of my students in our lab working on these guys, the crested drongos. This one is another endemic. It's one of the leaders in the bird flocks that the Prof mentioned earlier. And those guys are, there's few species, and the racket-tailed drongo is a widespread Asian drongo with a very large, long racket-like tail. And our form, the crested drongo, doesn't have the racket, but it does have a unique vocalization, and that vocalization it uses to defend the foraging flocks in the rainforest. And it's a black bird, but it's an extremely smart and pretty and elegant bird. Anybody who knows drongos would agree with me. Talking about the bird flocks in the Singharaja rainforest, these babblers play a critical role. They are the other leader or leaders of this bird flock, where especially the Rufus babbler or the orange-billed babbler and the ash-headed laughingthrush leads the flock with the help of the crested drongo. So together, 3 of those species lead, and we call them nuclear species. And they dictate where the flock goes, and about 50 or so other species follow these guys. In the canopy of this forest, you will see the endemic Sri Lanka myna or hill myna, the Legg's flower pecker. The flower pecker is actually named after the Vincent Legg that Prof mentioned, and a very rare starling. Another species that we work, and this guy is the Ceylon hill white-eye found in the mountains. The reason that I put this one is also a common bird in Singaraja, but when we've done the phylogenetics, the evolutionary aspect of this bird, these birds has the highest divergence or evolutionary rate for any known vertebrate in the planet. So as a whole, these white eyes and about 75 species scattered across Africa to Australia and Asia. And Ceylon hill white eye, or this particular bird that is endemic to Sri Lanka, is the basal, most ancient of all these white eyes. And as the knowledge, as we know about it, from them, the entire white eyes have been radiated. So it's amazing that this mother of white eyes actually stuck and found in the mountains of Sri Lanka as an endemic bird. And we'll finish that small journey from these 2 woodpeckers, the red woodpeckers. These are the flamebacks. In Sri Lanka, they are found in the southern part of the island. And in both these species, they are distantly related. This one is in the genus Dinopium, and this one is in the genus Chrysocoleptus, but they both look quite similar and red, and they both endemic to the island, and they both are the commonest types of woodpeckers. This one in the home gardens and this one in the forest. In Singaraja, you will see both of them. This one near the village, and this one near in the deeper forest. Let's see through them. Let's see how the endemicity, some of the aspects of these endemics being generated or created in the island. As I mentioned, one of my PhD students, and now he finishes his PhD, studied them exclusively. Another student currently working on them at UBC Vancouver, Canada, on their plumage coloration and evolution, genomics. So this is one of our studies group. That's what I wanted to highlight. So everywhere in rest of Asia, the flamebacks are red, yellow, except this one species here in Philippines. But in Sri Lanka, both these Chrysocoleptus genus, which is a different group of woodpeckers, and Dinopium genus, another different group of woodpeckers, they are all yellow in the rest of Asia. But in Sri Lanka, in the southern part, they both become red and almost look identical. This one is bigger, this one is smaller. So why they become red? So one of my PhD students, together we studied their genetics, their plumage, and as you can see, the green means yellow. For the clarity, I just make it green. So you can see that northern part has the yellow ones, and as they move south of Anuradhapura, they are all red, and these are the sampling sites and all. So we were we were curious about why Sri Lankan forms in different forms got red, and is there something special about it? So anyway, at the end of Saminda Fernando, the student's PhD, he found that the red males are quite attractive. So regardless of your origin, whether you are yellow or red, the females, the girls, like the red colored birds. So that actually basically bulldozed the yellow males from southern Sri Lanka and making Sri Lankan birds red. That had happened in both these forms and created Sri Lankan birds red. So as a result, now only in Sri Lanka though, That is another question to answer. One of my students, as I mentioned, looking into the genomics to understand why that happened only in Sri Lanka, why other girls out in Asia doesn't bother about the redness, even though those birds also have red crest. Anyway, so that's kind of a small anecdote about our endemics. We walked through the Singharaja rainforest. Let's zoom out. This text is Sri Lanka Sinhala text, and there's a kind of a catchword or a kind of almost like a slogan saying that Sri Lanka is the center of Asia. Lanka Asiyave Kendra. So let's see in the ornithological sense, is that true? Another small kind of global trot in the eye of a bird. So I will use another small corridor in Sri Lanka we call Rama's Bridge. Some call it Adam's Bridge. There's no connection to Adam and that bridge, but there's a lot of mythology, a lot of history, and written text on Rama and the Rama's connection to this. So this is India, this is Sri Lanka, and it's a very pretty place. So the Rama's Bridge is the connector that connects Sri Lanka with India, and in the when the years with global warming or about 30,000 year cycles, this gets flooded, and when the sea level drops, this gets a complete permanent bridge, and it's consisted of sandy islands. The Rama's Bridge is a unique place in the global sense, where the globe being used by birds as migratory routes. Like you guys live in California here, so you are in the Pacific Americas flyway, and we are in Sri Lanka here, so we are in the Central Asian flyway. And the world is like the birds in the world uses this Eastern Asian flyway, Central Asian flyway, Western Asian and African flyway, like European and Western African flyway, and then the Eastern Americas flyway, Mississippi flyway, and the Pacific flyway. So eight broad flyways to navigate from the poles to the other pole or to the tropics. And the Central Asian flyway is itself a unique flyway, and Sri Lanka is the southernmost landmass of that flyway. South of it is Antarctica. So unlike other flyways, it stops from tropics, and Sri Lanka is the southern point. And as a result, the birds from Europe, birds from Asia, and birds from even North America, Alaska, fly and get funneled along the Indian Peninsula, and eventually ended up in Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka plays a critical role in this flyway. So to study that, FOGSL, Field Ornithology Group of Sri Lanka, that Professor Kotagama had with few other established in 1970s. We have a long-term banding program, and in Mana, in Adams Bridge, in this case with some students of the University of Colombo, we set up nets, special nets, and catch these birds. The birds are in these bags. They are safely kept for like about half an hour in these bags, and we measure and we put special rings. This is called bird ringing. It's about century-old practice, and through bird rings we know where they go and where they come. It's a very kind of crude, primitive way, but you can know a lot. And in our lab at the Molecular Ecology and Evolution lab at the university, we study the genetics and other aspects. These are wildlife rangers who are in the forefront saving the wildlife of the country. So the rangers also sometimes come and get trained these new technologies. And talking about the Rama's Bridge again, it is a mecca for migrants, as well as it's mecca for breeding very rare breeding birds in the summer. For example, in the summer, some of these islands are littered with large eggs. These are much bigger eggs, about the size of a turkey egg, just laid on the sandy beaches, and they are kind of unprotected. So the birds has to lay eggs in remote islands to prevent dogs and other land mammals and comes and predate them. And in those islands, you see the courtship display, the eggs, And then this is very rare birds breeding like that. These are, some of these are critically endangered. All these are critically endangered, actually, including the owners of these eggs. And then later in the season, they are very common and they are running around. The babies run around, and the parents can recognize their calls through their unique vocalization. Each parent can recognize their own baby. The eggs are uniquely colored, so each parent can recognize its egg, a single egg, from this large aggregation of eggs. And so there's large numbers of birds. These are sensitive areas. I urge, if you guys come from California, don't try to contact Navy and try to go to these islands. The birds go to these remote islands for a reason, to avoid land predators like us. If we walk around, we will crush the eggs, and they'll get upset and they'll abandon the colony. Anyway, so with this last bit, another 3 minutes, we for Gesell, with the help of Chinese Academy of Sciences and the Wetlands International and BirdLife International, we recently launched a arduous, sophisticated program to understand where these birds exactly go and come using satellite tags. So I'll show you a few of those to end my story. So we do flagging. Now, if you ever see a green bird with a green ring and a flag in their legs, that's coming from Sri Lanka. It's a slightly modern way of marking birds than the leg bands that I showed earlier. We are now flagging these birds, this sort of birds with these flags. It's a harmless way, but gives you much information about where they come from. For example, this particular bird, an Indian photographer had photographed it in Mannar early this year. And that one actually was banded in 2014. Photographs can be obtained. But what we do here in Sri Lanka these days, starting May, is GSM tagging. So we put a special device, expensive but special device, and then through that device you can actually get the location of the bird and bird's behavior and the environmental conditions in every half an hour intervals. People who studied this, like for example, put these devices on bar-headed goose, got to know that the bar-headed goose fly over the Himalayas, and that's one of the very few birds who can do that. And these birds fly about 30,000 feet up. That is the cruising altitude of a Boeing 747 passenger aircraft. It's very low oxygen, and fly over Himalayas and reach southern India and sometimes Sri Lanka. This is an example of another bird that flies from Alaska to our parts of the world, and that is a very long journey, about 30,000 kilometers. It breeds in the Alaska, in the Americas, and fly directly non-stop to Australia and New Zealand, and then on its return journey flies to Yellow Sea, China, and then back to Alaska. So this round trip takes about 30,000 kilometers. Even in Sri Lanka, we have records of Arctic breeding curlew sandpipers flying through Sri Lanka to Australia and back to Arctic. So some of these birds fly very, very long distances. The grand master of that, this is the last slide. Grand master of this is the Arctic tern. Some of them fly from Arctic to Antarctica and spend the summer there and goes back to Arctic, and that the round trip is about 50,000 kilometers, and they live about 20 years in its lifespan. They fly about couple of times the distance equivalent to couple of times from the planet to moon and back, about 2.5 times. So this is a small bird, about size of a slightly smaller than a grackle or a myna. So through birds, you can learn a lot. I will end here. I'm the spokesperson. This is a collaborative network of students, academics, the corporate giants to photographers to artists, all walks of life, people from all walks of life, different agencies help this work in Sri Lanka. And thank you very much. I think I took about 5 minutes more. All right. Thanks. Over to you, Medini.
No worries. Thank you, Dr. Sampath Seneviratne. That was a fascinating journey, and we are very, very grateful and appreciative for taking us through that fantastic journey. So, going back to our panelists, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our next panelist, who is from California. So Mr. Benny Isaac Jacobs Schwartz is a California native. Benny's innate love for nature was evident at a very young age, and he eventually fell in love with birds during a college study abroad program in Costa Rica. Since graduating from the University of California, Santa Cruz, Benny has passionately pursued a career as an avian field biologist, international bird guide, land steward, and a wildlife photographer, working in various locations, including Central America, Trinidad and Tobago, Ecuador, Yosemite National Park, and most recently, coastal Alaska. A selection of his photos can be seen in his self-publication, A Field Guide to Birds of UC Santa Cruz. Benny established the Birds by Beaches in response to many requests for urban birding outings. The business has now grown to encompass a nature-inspired clothing line, bird photography and wildlife documentaries, and also local and international bird watching excursions. Based in Los Angeles, Beaches offers unique and compelling experiences found in natural history interpretation, local partnerships, low-impact tourism, conservation with top-notch accommodations. Benny hopes his love of the natural world will inspire others to conserve and preserve the open spaces around them. So Benny, a warm welcome to you, and we are very much looking forward to your presentation today. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Medini. Amazing introduction, and it's hard to go after two amazing researchers and conservationists. It was awesome to hear and see those awesome photos from Sri Lanka. I spent a little bit of time in South India on a birding trip in 2011, basically going from Chennai down the peninsula through the Western Ghats. So it was cool to journey back to the Southern Asian region of India area, and definitely made me excited to want to go back to that area and for sure check out Sri Lanka. So thank you both for your amazing knowledge and sharing. And I have a presentation prepared for you guys as well. That is not in particular about Sri Lanka, but certainly about tropical birds, which are interestingly connected in a variety of ways. And so today's journey is really interesting and really special. And we are going to be talking about the New World tropics. So we were talking about the Old World tropics in the two presentations beforehand. And this is an interesting contrast, which will also have some similarities and parallels. So this presentation is called Feathers in Flight. This is a journey to the new tropics. My name is Benny Jacob Schwartz. And without further ado, like Medini was sharing a little bit about my bio, I do a variety of different things within the kind of bird and conservation community, and one of which is producing clothing and artwork to inspire folks to connect about birds and shift the idea that bird watching or nature connection is just for old people. And so I do a variety of things. I do bird photography, bird videos, I do local birding tours and international stuff when the international opportunities open up again, and then some clothing / threads. And so here's a little bird walk I did in Oakland, California with some peers of mine. And this was a program that I developed recently before the pandemic hit, talking about corporate enrichment, basically offering opportunities for companies to provide bird watching opportunities locally, but using a real mindfulness approach with a curriculum that also focuses on sustainability and ways that we can lessen our impact on the globe. Alrighty, so before we dive into it, I'd like to speak a little bit broadly about what are the neotropics. And indeed, they are basically the New World tropics, and conveniently, I've provided them on this map here. So you can see they basically, technically the tropics are a narrow band throughout the world from Tropic of Cancer to the Tropic of Capricorn. But for our intents and purposes, the areas highlighted kind of in this darker orange color will serve as the New World tropics or the neotropics. So you can see it's highlighted here. That's what we really define specifically as the tropical regions, but like I just said. And so from an ornithological perspective, what is the importance of the New World tropics? Well, in Central America in general, which basically is these small countries here in between North and South America, we have roughly 1,594 species of birds recorded. And in South America, which is often regarded as the Mecca of birds, just in terms of sheer diversity in numbers, we have roughly 3,400 species of birds, which gives a grand total of about 50% of the global avian biodiversity, if we're using the AOU's consideration of about 10,000 globally recognized species. So it's pretty significant in terms of avian biodiversity. And so like we just said, that's a lot of area. And today on our journey, we're going to be covering 3 different destinations, one of which will be the dual island nation of Trinidad and Tobago. And then we'll be heading to the 3 islands, the Dutch Caribbean, the Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao, but just to Bonaire. And then lastly, we'll be heading to Ecuador, which is pretty divine in and of itself. So here's what Trinidad and Tobago looks like. Quite magnificent. It's like a warm tropical garden. And then here's a sunset shot from Bonaire. And then here is an image from the cloud forest region in northwest Ecuador. So I chose these 3 locations because they all have something very unique in common. And this is normally where I open it up to the audience to kind of share what their thoughts are. But for our time's sake and the fact that we're not having a live interactive audience, I'll just break it down for you guys. Excuse me. So as you can see here, this yellow line extends all the way across the western side of South America and actually extends all the way up into the northern part as well. Now, this line is basically tracing over the Andes Mountains. And as you can see, it actually splits from one contiguous mountain range into 3 sub-mountain ranges, or cordilleras, and it extends all the way actually north and east over towards Trinidad and Tobago and into Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao. So indeed, the Andes Mountains have a geological underlying foundation in Ecuador, in Bonaire, and Trinidad and Tobago. So before we get into the specifics within these countries, I wanted to kind of go over what drives biodiversity in the neotropics. Basically, what is contributing to these high numbers of biodiversity that we are observing? So first and foremost, equatorial regions have uniform monthly temperatures, and the same is true for tropical regions in Asia and the Old World as well. So the equatorial regions have uniform monthly temperatures. So that in and of itself is very important. And so what happens is there's this lack of distinct seasonality, right? So in the New World tropics, basically we have 2 seasons. We have the rainy season and the dry season. And so for the most part, we don't have these extreme temperature fluctuations, which basically allows animals to stay year round. So they're not forced to migrate from the tropical regions in search of food. And so we don't have these large sizable animal migrations like we do in other kind of boreal and austral regions where they're forced to migrate due to extreme temperature changes like snow and very low temperatures. And then another driver for this high biodiversity is basically the tropics welcome both boreal and austral migrants, escaping the extreme seasonal variation. So like I said, for number 3, animals aren't forced to leave, but in fact, the animals that are forced to leave in these very extreme polar regions, they're actually flocking to the tropics to to escape the cold temperatures and enjoy kind of a more moderate winter temperature. So with already the high resident population of biodiversity of birds, it gets even higher when these migrants winter there. And the last thing that's really interesting is that we have relatively high temperatures at high elevation. So for example, in places in North America, like California, for example, at Mount Whitney at 14,000 feet of elevation, there's very few birds that could be found there. Maybe you'd see a gray-crowned rosy finch or maybe a common raven or something like that. But in general, the diversity is extremely low. As opposed to a place like in the Andes Mountains at 14,000 feet in elevation, you'd still see a wonderful mix of hummingbirds and other Paramo specialists that exist in that area. So for per square footage, there's more land that's able to be utilized by birds in the tropical regions. Cool, so we understood the kind of general driver, but now the Andes Mountains actually served to further increase the biodiversity in the New World tropics. And so as you can see here, this is basically Paramo habitat in the forefront of the image, and then on the right side is a little bit of more brush habitat, and then as you get higher upslope, you can see how diverse this is. So this is, you know, several thousand feet of elevational change within the Andes Mountains. So what's so significant about the Andes Mountains is that actually they weren't always mountains. And just like it was mentioned in the earlier slides, that the Himalayan mountains are about 40 million years old, meaning that 40 million years ago, there wasn't this ginormous mountain range that had uplifted and basically bisected that part of Asia. Now, the same thing is true about the Andes Mountains in South America, where in fact, they're not nearly as old as the Himalayas, but historically, South America was once more of a plainer and flat kind of marshy, wet savanna. And so as you can see here, this green region was basically now Amazonia, this like flat, these like kind of relatively lowland tropical rainforest. And now it's separated from the Andes Mountains. And so Amazonia used to continue all the way west, but now it's actually cut in half, or not half, but it's basically split apart via the uplift of the Andes Mountains. And so as these animals that once had a contiguous population, they've actually become separate. And so over time, they've become genetically different and eventually became or diverged into separate species. So the Andes Mountains split up and increased the biodiversity. Additionally, the valleys in the Andean Mountains are so textured and so dense and so profound that it actually cut off a lot of the gene flow between the west side of the valleys and the east side of the valleys. And this is a term that we call in biology or in ecology allopatric speciation. So there are geographic factors that were preventing gene flow and gene mixing between these species. And so here's a zoom in of these inter-Andean cordilleras. And so basically there's this altiplano, which is basically a mesa or a flat area. And then there's the Western Cordillera and the Eastern Cordillera. So within these two, basically this altiplano is serving as an allopatric factor, separating the Western Cordillera and the Eastern Cordillera. So birds that once were mixing in between these regions are now actually separated due to this distance. And so over time, again, the same process of genetic diversity happening on a community level and a population level, and then subpopulations and subspecies, et cetera, until they became completely genetically distinct. And then here we go, there's the inter-Andean point, moving right along. So in our first stop in Trinidad and Tobago, and then just to highlight these, all the media that you see in here are photographs that I've taken through my journeys. And so here's Trinidad and Tobago, for those of us who forgot exactly where it is. It's northeast off the coast of Venezuela, just a few miles off the coast, but it is a separate country with its own related avifauna. So Trinidad and Tobago has roughly 472 species of birds reported here. And it's, like we mentioned earlier, it's partially has underlying geology from the Andes Mountains. Now, what's so interesting about Trinidad and Tobago is that unlike many of its other Caribbean islands found here in the West Indies, Trinidad and Tobago is not exclusively karst geology. And what karst is basically underlying limestone. And so what that means is that, oopsies, sorry guys. What means that is that it actually has a much higher species richness and species biodiversity because the underlying soil is actually from the Andes Mountains and not limestone in origin, like a lot of these other Caribbean islands, which are known for their low species richness. And so Trinidad and Tobago has soil that is remnant from the Andes Mountains, thus promoting a much higher vegetative community, as well as which obviously supports a much higher biodiversity of birds. So Trinidad and Tobago is very special in that way in relation to other Caribbean islands. Here it is again. So Trinidad and Tobago is chock full of dazzling bird species. So we have this copper-rumped hummingbird, and then next to it, we actually have another look at the copper-rumped hummingbird. So you can see it's very kind of this shimmery emerald green in the front, and then where its namesake, this really coppery rust color on its rump. Up next, we have the brown violet ear, which is actually one of the most rare or uncommon hummingbirds to see in Trinidad and Tobago, despite the fact that it's relatively common throughout the rest of its range in Latin America. Next up, we have the gorgeous ruby topaz. This is certainly a photographic target in the region. And then following that, we have the black-throated mango, which is undoubtedly gorgeous as well. And then next up, we have a white-necked Jacobin, which is also quite common on the islands, as well as quite common within its range. Here's a closer look at the absolutely gorgeous ruby topaz. You can see why folks would want to take some photos. Next up, we have a white-necked Jacobin, an absolutely spectacular hummingbird species. Interesting that it was named white-necked Jacobin, given how little white it has on its neck, but I didn't name it, so I can't really say anything about that. Another spectacular hummingbird found on the islands is the Rufus-breasted hermit. And another gorgeous bird is this Capermolgidae. This is the white-tailed nightjar. And this was actually photographed on an open road at night after we were doing some astrophotography. And basically we set the car up in front of the bird with the light on, and then I got out and was crawling as close as I could, basically to the, the closest distance for the focal length to still focus on the bird. And it turned out quite well. Another amazing bird found in Trinidad and Tobago is the rufous-tailed jacamar. These guys are kind of mid-story insectivorous specialists. You can see that really long beak, kind of like tweezers, specializing in flying insects. And this individual put on quite a display and allowed for us to observe at quite a close proximity. Here's an island endemic. This is the Trinidad motmot, even though it's actually almost exclusively found on Tobago. It's quite a spectacular bird. There's many motmot species found throughout Latin America, and they all have this very diagnostic kind of rackets on their tail, like we were learning about with the racket-tailed drongo and in India. And here's another spectacular bird. This is the blue and gold macaw. And actually, upon my arrival in Trinidad and Tobago, I didn't realize that we had an intact population of blue and gold macaws. And although the population is quite small and restricted locally, you can still see these beautiful birds there. Here's another look at these extremely gregarious birds. And here's a nice in-flight, kind of a high-key look at this bird. One more for good measure. And here's a striated heron. And in the interest of time, we're going to keep chugging along. A spectacular savanna hawk after a little bit of rain, hunting in agricultural area, looking for small rodents. And here's one of the most coveted photography targets on Trinidad. This is the tufted coquette. And this beautiful bird is actually not a common species at all. This is actually one of the best places in the world to observe them. And they actually only visit bushes for their nectar. They don't visit hummingbird feeders. So if you want to see or photograph the tufted coquette, you've got to head to a particular place. And since most male hummingbirds get all the love, I wanted to highlight the absolute exquisite beauty of this female tufted coquette. And as you can see here, there's some pollen flecks on her beak as well, indicating indeed that she was visiting flowers and not hummingbird feeders. One absolutely magnificent bird found in Trinidad and Tobago in the mangrove habitats is the scarlet ibis. Now the scarlet ibis is, as you can see, quite a gorgeous bird. I'm a particular fan of red and this really rich color. Decided to slow the shutter speed down a little bit on these guys to get a little bit of the motion happening in flight. And so here's what a bush, or not a bush, but basically a small mangrove island within this mangrove estuary. And all these scarlet ibises return here nightly to roost to avoid predation from their #1 predator, which is a peregrine falcon, as well as from large boa constrictors like anacondas that like to feed upon them. And here's a short video of them returning to roost. And next up, we have the Trinidad piping guan. Now, this bird is actually an endemic species. It's critically endangered, and its habitat is extremely threatened due to development and logging. It's also threatened because it turns out, although it looks just like a turkey, it tastes very similar to a turkey. Now, I can't say that I've tried this bird myself, but local folks definitely use this as a form of bushmeat and consume it. So, pretty unfortunate since it's actually only found on Tobago, even though it's a Trinidad piping guan. This bird is absolutely gorgeous, and here's a short video. So it's only found in a couple locations and reliably, and as you can see, very interesting bird. Here's another look at the Trinidad piping guan up in the tree. And the next stop on our journey is to a small island off the coast of Tobago, which is called Little Tobago Island. And this was a scene out of, I believe, Blue Planet or Planet Earth 2. And here we're actually going to examine the amazing red-billed tropic birds that roost here. Now the red-billed tropic birds nest on these rocky, exposed jagged cliffs on the edge of the island, and they go out to sea and they commute looking for fish. And as you can see, they've got these magnificent tail streamers and the diagnostic red bill here. And these birds are basically a mix between terns and gulls. They're very agile, but they're not nearly as agile as some of our smaller terns, nor are they as clunky as our larger gulls, but they're quite beautiful. And they have an interesting relationship here with the magnificent frigate bird, which is what we call a kleptoparasite, which means that it basically harasses other birds for its food. Until basically what they'll do is they'll follow the red-billed tropic bird and they'll soar above it overhead, and then they'll watch it go hunt, and then they'll basically observe the red-billed tropic bird to see if the crop is distended, or to see basically if this food-holding pouch is basically bulging, which is an indicator to the frigate birds to know, oh, okay, there's an easy meal here with the red-billed tropic bird. And so the frigate birds will cue in on this signal, and then they'll go harass the tropic birds, and often so aggressively that they'll sometimes pull on their tail streamers in flight and swing them around until the bird basically regurgitates or ejects the food from its crop. And then the frigate bird will actually catch the food before it hits the surface of the water, and then continue doing that until it's got all of its calories for the day. So here's another look at these magnificent red-billed frigate bird, or excuse me, the red-billed tropic bird colonies. You can see there's some other islands around here in the West Indies, and all these white dots are the tropic birds. Pretty spectacular view, to say the least. Here's another look at the red-billed tropic bird. Just absolutely magnificent. And another look, because why not? Alrighty, so as we finished up our first stop on our journey, we're going to continue on to a little bit farther west and to show the contrast between these two locations. Now, Bonaire is very different, and that's because the underlying geology is almost exclusively limestone, and the vegetation here is kind of like an African savanna mixed with like Joshua tree. It's very rugged, it's very sharp, it's very drought tolerant, salt tolerant, and there are obviously salt flats, as well as intact coastal mangrove habitat, as well as like very dry acacia scrub found throughout the island. And as you can see here, they have some flamingos. This is the Caribbean flamingo, and you can see a large tricolored heron in the background. Here's a headshot of a Caribbean flamingo very deep in the water. And they're actually so famous for their flamingos on Bonaire that their airport is called Flamingo International. And here's kind of a zoomed out look of the shot I showed earlier with just the headshot. You can see how amazingly adapted they are with this scythe-like bill to filter out brine shrimp and other flies that would be congregating on the edges of the salt flats. And they have these really long legs that actually allow them, as you can see, to get really deep in the water. And then in this, let's see if there's this image. Yeah, in this image, you can see their social behavior hanging around these kind of shallow mud flats, and then using their bill to kind of sweep across the top of the surface of the mud to kind of churn up the small flies that are breeding and occupying this habitat. Next up is kind of a Caribbean endemic. This is the pearly thrasher. It's in the Mimidae family. These are kind of the super tramp of birds out here. They occupy a lot of Caribbean islands where there's low species richness. And this is a juvenile bird perched up in an acacia tree that was quite accommodating. Next up, this is a female blue-tailed emerald. This is a type of hummingbird found out here. The hummingbird diversity on this island is not particularly high, but what it does have are quite beautiful. And you can see this is a really interesting photograph that came out. I wasn't really sure how it came out at first because I saw her in a nice perch. She was kind of under the shade of this acacia tree. And then I got the image on my computer and I started to open up the shadows a little bit and played around with some of the light balance a little bit, and I was super pleased with the way it came out. I love the really soft effect and almost kind of like very dreamy pastels. So I like the way that one came out. Here's another look of the habitat as well as this blue-tailed emerald. And you can see this female is visiting the flowers of this cacti here. And you can see how important their visual acuity is in locking in, because if she made a wrong turn, she might end up impaled on one of those spines. Here's an amazing shot of a crested caracara. This is another beautiful raptor found on the island. And we've got a lot more to cover, so I'm not going to go so deep on individual bird species. This is a brown-throated parakeet. This is a near endemic. It's found on 2 of the 3 ABC islands and feeding on some wild grape here. And you can see it's kind of gushing in its mouth, and then a little bit of the brown throat, which is clearly the namesake for this parakeet. And here's a tropical mockingbird, again, really emphasizing the the sharpness and the ruggedness of the habitat here. You got to be careful while you're walking because there's a lot of acacia scrub that can definitely impale you and birds. Here's more acacia, believe it or not, right at the edge of the water with a little sora kind of foraging and trotting through the water here. And although this bird is not native to Bonaire, it is a spectacular bird. This is in the Icteridae family, which includes orioles and blackbirds and things like that, which are widespread throughout the world. But this is the Venezuelan troupial, and it is about 40% larger than many of the orioles that we have in kind of the Indian subcontinent region, as well as here in North America. Here's an American oystercatcher occupying the rocky intertidal. Although most typically found in the eastern United States, the American oystercatcher is also found in the West Indies here on Bonaire. Here's another beautiful wading bird. This is the reddish egret. Just amazing plumes. They come in a variety of color morphs, but this is the reddish morph. Okay, so we just hit our 2 destinations. Now we're heading down to Ecuador. Now, this is an extremely biodiverse country, and we're gonna visit 4 different life zones here in Ecuador. And we're gonna start at the highest elevation, and we're gonna make our way down to the lowland habitat. So as you can see here, this map is basically color-coded based on elevational gradients. Purple, or this kind of pastel pink, being the highest elevational gradient. And again, if you remember, this is the Andes Mountains, just a slice of the range that runs through Ecuador. And then green is the lowland habitat. So join me on our journey as we start in the Paramo, or El Paramo, which is basically this defined as a tropical alpine habitat. Now, which is very interesting, like I said before, at high elevations in the tropics, we still have a very high species richness and species biodiversity. Now, found between 9,000 or maybe 11,000 feet and higher, the Paramo is very unique. It has this low brushy habitat, and this is just one area with a lot of bryophytic plants, which lack vascular tissue, which grow on the surface where they get their water, as well as these dry grasses and things like that. You can see a variety of other plants in this community. Now, the Paramo is very unique. It has a lot of differences within its elevational range, especially in regards to its avian life. Now, this is one that was found at about 9,500 feet in elevation, so that's roughly 3,000 plus feet roughly 3,000 meters plus. And this is the sparkling violet ear, and probably a close relative of the brown violet ear, like I showed you guys in Trinidad and Tobago. But this is definitely an absolutely gorgeous bird. You can see how iridescent all of its feathers are, and quite a spectacular observation. This is the giant hummingbird, was one of the more famous birds found in the Andean Paramo. This giant hummingbird is roughly the same size as a northern cardinal, which is maybe the size of a myna or something like that. So it's quite a large bird, and what it lacks in its showy plumage, it makes up for in its large size. And you can see here a little bit of pollen residue on its beak, indicating that this bird was in fact visiting real life flowers. And this is the Andean condor, one of the largest soaring birds in South America. Not the most amazing photo, but it is from far away, and it's an absolutely magnificent bird. It's the South American analog to our North American California condor. Now, one of my certainly favorite photos ever, and one of my amazing photo targets from the time in Ecuador, was the sword-billed hummingbird. I was originally inspired by first learning about it during Planet Earth 2, during their jungles episode, learning about the magnificent, magnificent hummingbirds found in the tropics. And when I came to Ecuador, I was just like, oh man, I really hope I see this sword-billed hummingbird. And luckily I did. And as you can see from a photographic aspect, shooting within the canopy of the tropics is really difficult. It pushes your gear to the absolute limits. And so in this case, I use a little bit of a fill flash to light up my subject and maintain my dark background and make sure that it's nice and focused. And as you can see here, my shutter speed was actually just slow enough so that it created a little bit of motion within the shot. And this is what we call wing ghosting. So rather than some of my other images that were really crisp and focused, this shows a little bit of the motion that was happening here. And so the sword-billed hummingbird is an absolutely amazing bird. The only bird in the world whose beak is actually longer than it is, has the longest beak of any bird in relation to its body size. And it's so long that its beak actually is not able to help it preen and maintain its feather quality, but it actually uses its foot to scratch and maintain its high quality feathers. Here's another look at the sword-billed hummingbird with a little bit better lighting. As you can see, some of those details were getting picked up a little bit better. Here's another large hummingbird. This is the great sapphire wing, also found in the Paramo habitat. Here's a scarlet-bellied mountain tanager, found in, oftentimes tanagers in the tropics, in the New World tropics, are found in mixed flocks, but these guys like to hang out in just smaller pairings. Here's another beautiful hummingbird. This is the rainbow-bearded thornbill. And as you can see, it's actually perched on the ground. And this was really an interesting observation, because prior to this observation, I'd never really seen a hummingbird on the ground. And these are basically hummingbirds are found only in the New World, and they're kind of like the New World analogs to our Old World sunbirds. And this guy was basically coming to visit flowers that were growing on the ground, because like I said, in the Paramo, most of the vegetation is growing very close to the ground. So if there's nothing to perch up high, perch down low. This is the shining sunbeam. This bird is absolutely gorgeous from behind. You can see this real rainbow kind of prism of colors, and also the wet moisture indicating that we are still in the Paramo and it's quite moist here. And here's the black-faced ibis. This bird was actually kind of endangered in Ecuador because of its isolated range. However, its population throughout the rest of the Andes is doing quite well. And as we continue to make our way downslope in Ecuador, we are now in the cloud forest. Now, the cloud forest is a really unique area, and it has some of the highest biodiversity of any part of the country. And the cloud forest is really interesting. It's roughly, between 55 and 65 degrees. It's inundated with daily rain showers. And as you can see, it's covered in a lot of vegetation, a lot of parasitic and hemiparasitic plants, as well as bryophytes, things that are, a lot of epiphytes that are growing on top of other plants, whether it's mosses or liverworts, fungi. They basically serve as a sponge to maintain the moisture within the cloud forest. And so when it rains, like it does almost every single day, the moisture is actually retained in all this vegetation. And so as the vegetation retains the moisture, eventually it trickles down into the streams. And the reason why I chose the order of this from the highest to the lowest is to emphasize the real importance of this habitat connectivity. And each of these life zones couldn't exist without one another, because a lot of the rain that's happening in the Paramo is feeding down into the cloud forest. And the cloud forest, although it gets most of the rain, a lot of this water is actually being transported downslope through the Andean foothills into the Amazon basin. So a vast majority of the water that we observe in the mighty Amazon is actually originating from the cloud forest. In order to ensure the longevity of bird species and the health of our ecosystems, we need to maintain this viewpoint of ecosystem-based conservation, which will obviously be less expensive than focusing on a specific species, and much more effective because we are conserving across taxa and across biomes, which is really important to understand. So as you can see here in the background, the cloud forest is creating its own ecosystem conditions as this water is evapotranspiring off of the leaves of all the trees, creating these very cloudy, misty, and high precipitation ecosystems. And there's no doubt quite a beautiful selection of birds here. This is the masked trogon. Also very interesting that this trogons have worldwide distribution, especially in the old world. During my trip to India, like I said, I've not been to Sri Lanka yet, but during my trip to India, I definitely saw Malabar trogon in the Western Ghats and a couple other trogon species. And I've seen trogons in Southeast Arizona here in North America, as well as throughout my time in the tropics. So very cool, kind of tying into this kind of Pangea and Gondwana and this continental drift theory. And here's a beautiful corvid. This is the beautiful jay, a golden tanager. I'm going to go through these quickly because we've got a lot of beauties. The velvet purple coronet, another beautiful hummingbird, green-crowned wood nymph. And Ecuador is actually home to 133 hummingbird species, so there's a lot to see here. This is the buff-winged coronet, and the violet-tailed sylph, which is a regional endemic. This is the crimson-rumped toucanet, which is actually not at all related to hornbills, even though they have a very similar morphological adaptation. Toucans are part of the Rhamphacidae family, and I don't recall exactly what family the hornbills are, but they are actually an example of parallel evolution, where two different birds, in terms of like their community and populations, evolved to have very similar traits, even though they are not related at all genetically. This is the pale-billed aracari. And then here's one of the most gorgeous toucans. This is the plate-billed mountain toucan, also a regional endemic. Now this is not a toucan, even though it wants to be. This is a barbet, which is also a type of bird who has worldwide global distribution as well as in the old world. I saw some barbets during my time in India, and I'm sure I would see some when I go to Sri Lanka. As you can see, there's a lot of color similarities between these two. And here's another gorgeous bird. This is the flame-faced tanager, and maybe one of the most famous birds from the Latin American region. This is the Andean cock of the rock. And as we continue to make our way downhill, we've entered into the Andean foothills. Now, the Andean foothills are extremely warm, high humidity, and has its fair share of rain as well. Here's a red-headed barbet, a white-tailed trogon. Again, two types of birds that have worldwide distribution. A clubbed-winged manakin restricted to the New World. Here's a guida tanager, the pale-throated umbrella bird, and a little bit of mist. Now, for the amazing, amazing journey that I'm going to take you on, now into the Amazon basin of Ecuador. Now, the Amazon spans several different countries, but my time in the Amazon has only been in Ecuador, and I have no complaints about it. This section of the country was probably one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. And everything you've heard about the Amazon is true. It's hot, it's buggy, there's amazing wildlife, and it's quite special. Now, as you see here, this is Quito. This is the capital of Ecuador. And this is where we were on our journey. So this is the Rio Napo, which is one of nine primary tributaries to the Amazon River. So the Amazon is not one river, it's this ginormous wetland basin, and fed by, like I said, cloud forest habitat that's feeding into the Amazon basin. And along our journey, we are basically here in the Rio Napo. You see where it says Napo? That's where this journey is taking us. And then here's a little bit closer in Yasuni National Park. This is where most of these next photos were taken from. So one thing that's so special about the Amazon is it has something what we call an emergent canopy. And as you can see, this is actually an image obviously on top of the canopy. And emergent means that over time, the forest continues to grow. There's no height limit because all of these trees are actually competing for the opportunity to photosynthesize, which is from light photons from the sun. And so they have to keep growing to make sure that they're able to get enough light that they need. So the canopy in the Amazon is amazingly tall, and it's really hot, and you're at sea level. So it's a really challenging experience to go birding. And so they've built these canopy towers so that you can often get a bird's eye view of the forest in hopes of seeing some very special bird species. Some of which are following. This is the ladder-tailed nightjar, which is a close relative to the white-tailed nightjar that I showed from Trinidad and Tobago. Here are the scarlet macaws, which are absolutely gorgeous, visiting a clay lick within the Amazon rainforest. And they come down to obtain the precious minerals and nutrients that are found here. And then here's one of the backwater journeys when we were looking for a couple specific bird species in the Amazon. This is a short time lapse from my iPhone, and you can just see it's so remote. Nobody's in here in this little stretch, and it's absolutely breathtaking. And it is highly variable within this region. And with all the rainfall and precipitation that happens, sometimes the path gets obstructed. And this is the end of our journey on this little boat ride. But there's no shortage of gorgeous birds here, including the black-capped Danacobius, the striated heron, literally eating a piranha, which is pretty amazing. Here's a Kokoi heron, which is closely related to the gray heron or the great blue heron. Here's another one. This is the roseate spoonbill. You can see it's really uniquely adapted bill for foraging for small invertebrates. Here's a burrowing owl shot in the Amazon. This is a white-fronted nunbird, another very unique and interesting bird. Here's the Amazon by night sky. I got very lucky to have a clear night to do some astrophotography. And then here is a very particularly interesting bird. This is a hoatzin, otherwise known as a stink turkey. And these birds are really old in terms of their evolutionary history. They're basically been around since the time of dinosaurs, and they are not eaten because they smell horrible and their meat tastes very bad. And they're actually vegetarian, and they're strictly arboreal. So they only eat leaves, and they live up in the trees. And here's another look at this arboreal hoatzin. Here's a snail kite. You can see it's kind of uniquely adapted bill for opening the operculum of apple snails and pulling their fleshy parts out to consume them. And here's a horned screamer. This is a very interesting bird also found within the Amazon region. Now, I'm going to wrap up with a very interesting conservation message, which ties into our two previous presenters talking about the habitat connectivity and why it's important to understand how birds migrate, which ties to my idea or the concept that I was sharing about this ecosystem-based conservation. Now, as you can see here, on the map, we basically have three regions that we hit. This was the Trinidad and Tobago, here was Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao, and then here's Ecuador. Now, these migrational flyways are critical because birds are not just found in one region. A lot of our birds are actually migratory, like we learned in these other presentations, especially birds that are wintering down in Sri Lanka, including the bar-tailed Godwit, which is breeding in Alaska. And Alaska is this really epic migration hotspot where tons of birds are returning every summer to breed. And so understanding this large aspect is really important. And so for us in North America, our birds are actually migrating to and from Latin America back to North America. And so here's some of our North American migrants that are actually wintering in the tropics, like I said, which increases the overall species biodiversity in those regions. And so for North America, we often refer to our birds because in the summertime they're back and in the wintertime they return to Latin America. But what's interesting to understand is that in North America, we've lost 2.9 billion birds since 1970. And so in relation to migratory birds, we've lost about 2 in 5 Baltimore Orioles since 1970, which is about a 28% loss in migratory bird species. And so what's so important and what was mentioned again is that we're noticing globally that our bird populations are decreasing as our areas are continuing to be developed and basically competing with human inhabitation and industrial development. We're losing a lot of this critical habitat that birds need to survive. And so maybe just because in one area of California we have good conservation measures doesn't mean that the same conservation measures are present in Latin America or in some particular places where these birds are wintering. So it's important to work collaboratively, internationally, and across agencies so that we can support bird health and conservation. And in North America, we developed seven simple actions that we can do to protect our birds, some of which is drink shade-grown coffee, reduce plastic use, do citizen science like eBird and things like that, make our windows safer by putting decals so birds know that it's a glass window, they don't crash. Keep your cats indoors because they're one of the #1 predators of birds in the United States and potentially the world. Plant native plants because the birds that are from here want plants that are from here too. And of course, avoid pesticides because as most of us know, those have deleterious impacts on our environment and have very serious impacts on our wildlife. So how can we help? These are a lot of different organizations that are doing extremely good conservation work to preserve our birds here in the Western Hemisphere. And obviously you can support local entrepreneurs and conservationists who are trying to spread the good word about birds and make sure that folks stay educated and support local enterprise to protect birds. And thank you guys so much for tuning in and your rapt attention. That's all I have for you right now.
Well, thank you very much, Benny. And I can see that we have all our panelists with us back again on our screen. So as we wrap up our panel discussion, I have a few questions. I'll start with you, Benny. We talked a lot about birds today. So for our audience, if you can summarize in few words, if a bird lover is getting ready to go on a bird watching, what are the most important things to consider during the preparation plan?
That's a good question. During the preparation plan, I would say, there's a couple of things. I would say know where, I don't know, that's a tricky one. It depends on what type of trip you're thinking about. Like a local trip, really, you just kind of want to like keep an open mind and keep your senses tuned so you can make like good observations and notice what's around you. I would say a preparation for a birding trip on a local level and any level is really just making sure you have a good working pair of binoculars. For folks who are just starting out, binoculars can totally change the game for you. I remember before I was into birds, I had never really looked through binoculars before. And when I first looked through binoculars, I was like, oh, wow, this is amazing. I was in Costa Rica, like you mentioned in my bio, and I saw these colorful birds, you know, really up close, and I was like, wow, this is spectacular. So I would say, make sure you get yourself a nice, affordable, but effective pair of binoculars, and pick a spot that's close to home so that you can visit frequently and get to know the habitat and learn a lot of the birds that live there.
Thank you so much, Benny. We really appreciate your time today. So moving on to Dr. Sampath Seneviratne. Dr. Seneviratne, as a senior researcher and a biologist, you have conquered both worlds conducting your research work, not only in Sri Lanka and Asia, but also in North America as well. If you want to give an advice to our young biologists, researchers who are in the audience today, what is that advice?
That's a good one. That's a good one. I think I'm not muted. Yes. What would be the advice? The thing is that, I mean, yes, since the topic is on birds, I would say, I mean, through birds, you can be a poet. Through birds, you can be an artist. Through birds, you can be a photographer. You can be a scientist. You can study the life on Earth. You can study the history, the evolution, the genetics, the diseases. So it's another form that we could. It's almost like a mirror. You can study anthropology. You can study the human behavior through birds. So I think the curiosity. The key is the curiosity. So if you have the curiosity and some kind of sense about your surroundings, the environment, and who you are, and wanting to know about it, nature is a good source. So keep your curiosity intact, whether you are a youngster or an older person or somebody who's busy at your routine work. Still, that curiosity makes you you somebody beyond a normal another animal. Right?
Thank you so much, Dr. Sampath Seneviratne, and thank you so much for taking us through that fascinating journey as well during your presentation. Moving on to Professor Kotagama. Professor Kotagama, you are a legend. You have created your own legacy, highly respected in Sri Lanka and all around the world for your contribution. So as a final statement, as we wrap up our panel discussion today for the bird lovers in Sri Lanka and all around the world, what is your message?
Well, I think it was mentioned, I think, on the way somewhere. We have one planet, so we need to work to ensure that we will be in this planet for the future, because we believe that it is the future that matters a lot often when we talk about our children and mankind and all of that. But apparently we missed the bus, or we made a mistake and got onto the wrong bus, and we are going down the precipice. So I think it's time to reflect on why we are going down and make it turn around, so that those who are going to get into the bus in the future are not going to go down the precipice. It's this generation that has to make the difference. It's no point saying the children must become conservationists. It's this generation that made the mess. So it is this generation that needs to make the change. If we doesn't make the change, don't expect the future to do it, because they are going to look at us and say, look, you guys did everything, and why are you telling us not to have the best of the world? But we have to tell them that we made the best of the world and made a mess for you. It's just that we are not saying that, and we are not reflecting on that and making a change today. All aspects, I would say, it is that. It's just simply that the present generation should make the change if we are really serious about ensuring that single planet that what we have is going to be our home for the future.
Thank you so much, Professor Kotagama, and it was an honor to have you in our panel discussion today. And for all our viewers all around the world, especially for our expatriate Sri Lankans, well, let's look forward to the day that we can visit Sri Lanka and enjoy that wonderful biodiversity. So, Suri, if we can share with the audience what our next panel discussion is going to be. So just a sneak peek into what we have in the pipeline for you on September 19th, Saturday, LA time 7:30, Sri Lankan time 8 p.m. So Southern California and international photo organizations. Well, this is going to be a very, very interesting panel discussion as well. We are going to have our panelist, Joanne Stolt, who is the president of Photographic Alliance of America, FIAP liaison officer for the USA, joining us for our next panel discussion. And we invite our audience all around the world to join us on September 19th, Saturday, LA time, 7:30 a.m., Sri Lankan time, 8 p.m. And once again, I take this opportunity to thank our three panelists today, Professor Sarath Kotagama and Dr. Sampath Seneviratne, who joined us from Sri Lanka, and also Mr. Benny Isaac Jacobs Shawards, who joined us from California. So thank you so much for all our viewers all around the world for joining us today. You guys have been with us through this entire journey. We really appreciate your participation and joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again on Saturday, September 19th. Until then, stay safe.